What do you want?
Mr. Carver, that artist is here again.
Ah, yes. Send him in.
You wanted to see me again, Mr. Carver?
Yes. A painting of me you made. It's hideous.
Your portrait?
Am I not making that obvious?
It's just
Oh, come on, lad. I pay you for a new portrait. It's not like I'm a monster or anything. You got all your things?
Yeah, right here.
And start setting up. I'll get into position shortly.
I'm sorry, what's the stick for, sir?
Oh, it's technically a unipod, used for cameras. But you and your, imagination are going to paint it as a scepter.
A scepter?
Yes, the last portrait you did failed to capture my regalness, to make me look like the king that I am. That painting next to Mum and Dad, it just looked weak, out of place, wrong.
Oh, okay. That gives me a direction. And the stool...
Oh, you're gonna use that to make me look taller? Make me legs longer.
Gotcha. So I'm not really feeling the regalness you want.
Of course.
Why don't you get back into position and, tell me why you feel regal.
Why I feel regal? Because I run this city! There is little to nothing that happens on these streets that I don't know about, that I don't have some kind of hand in. That's the way of the Partridge name, and I worked very hard to make that happen.
Pose, sir?
Ah, right. The Partridge family, my family, has had a stake in this city for generations. We made our fortunes here. Well, I suppose it's not what you need. You want me to show my regalness? Well, fine. When I was a kid, the Partridges were one of the top dogs in the city of Tahl-thehn. Alongside us were several other families. One of them was called the Knights. New money family, folks who had just come into
the Knights? Can't say that I've ever heard of them.
You damn rocks have buried them! Crushed their name in the dust so no one in Tahl-thehn would ever remember their trash name! Sorry, I seem to jump straight to the end here. I guess I need to inform you on how things were back then. The Knight and Partridge families were thick as thieves, wrapped tightly around each other in mutual respect. The families would spend time together, help each other, have fancy parties with each other. I used to play with the Knight's son, same age as me, Brandon Knight. This city, hell, this country, doesn't recognise any bit of royalty. But we were the closest thing this city had to princes, and we had the run of the city. Brandon was a bit more squeaky clean, a good balancing for me at that age, a conscience like Jiminy Cricket. We used to spend so much time hanging out together. We went to the same private school in the city, had a small band of mates. I had a habit of getting into scraps with other kids at the school, but Brandon was always there to either have my back or pull me back if I was acting too hastily. He would always set me straight if I was the one who had gone out of line. Like I said, a good balancing. But it wasn't meant to last. When I turned 8, my father, in his infinite wisdom, forced me to go to our family's home country, England, to study at a boarding school all our family members had been taught by, Brigsby's. I did not want to go. I turned to my mum to try to change his mind. My father was always a violent and distant man. We never really saw eye to eye. But my mother, she was an angel and was far more understanding. But it didn't matter. My father's mind was set. And nothing would change it. I was sent off to England, alone. He tore me away from my family, my friends, my mum, Brandon, everyone. My time in England, unfortunately, my time in England isn't something really worth talking about. I didn't do nothing while I was out there. I raised some hell at school, even more outside of it. Found a new band of mates. Lost one of them. But 10 years later, and I turned 18. I finished up my studies, poured one out for my lost mate, and graduated as one of the highest in my class. Boring, I know. But I had plans to take over family businesses, run my father out of them. You need to be smart to do that. I figured after what he had done to me, he didn't deserve another penny. I returned home to an empty manor and only my father. He told me during my time away, a behind-the-scenes war had come to a head between my family and the Knights. Apparently Mum and Dad saw this war coming, but I don't remember noticing any of the tension he was now describing. But I guess at 7 years old you wouldn't. He tells me the reason they sent me away was to make sure I wasn't caught up in the middle of it all, especially with me and Brandon being such good friends, but oddly enough, Brandon wasn't sent away. My folks lost that war, and it left the Partridge name and empire in shambles. Only a few penny businesses left. Somewhere during my time away, my mum was forcefully committed to the insane asylum. One that Melissa Knight, Brandon's mother, was on the doctor's board for. They kept her locked up there for years, driving her actually insane, never letting my father see her. Until Knight likely had her killed via an overdose of drugs. My father did not feel the need to tell me of these events happening, until I had come home. Years after they had happened, years after she was buried, I never got a chance to say goodbye, even at her funeral. This is what I returned to? Ruins? I went ballistic on my father, shouted at him how weak he was for letting the enemy kill Mum. To fail us, to fail me! He let our fortune fall! He slunk off to his office without another word. And shortly after, I heard a gunshot. Running to the room, I found my father splayed on his desk with a hole in his head and a gun in his hand. That's when my life really began. The cops gave me the official ruling of death. Suicide. Even presented a note for proof. Nah. My father was weak. But not suicidal. And anyone who knew the power of the Knights Wheeler knew that they had the Tahl-thehn Police Department on their payroll. There was no doubt in my mind the Knights were the cause of all this. They, or someone they hired, killed my father. On a day I returned from England, and they used the cops in their pocket to cover it up. But those thoughts quickly took a back seat. Because with my father now dead, the family businesses came to me. And I had big plans. Unlike my father, I was willing to get my hands dirty. The first thing I set about doing was introducing more interesting business endeavours into the fold. Bringing in goods from England to the city, through the docks at night. A little money spent to get the dock workers to look the other way, but you do need to spend money to make money. And we certainly started to. No more mom and pop shops or a pawn store in the middle of the poor district where no money was flowing anyway. It wasn't long before I'd gathered enough cash to start a new business venture. Guns. This country has always had a strange idea of how guns should be widely available to unstable civilian hands, but why wouldn't I take advantage of that? Then gambling, sex workers, chop shops. I was particularly fond of that one. In only a few years, I had money flowing back into the Partridge businesses, and my name was talked about more and more throughout the city. But then I hit a ceiling. Businesses weren't growing anymore. I was thinking about how else I could bring money into this city when I had a desk. Who makes more than me? The Knights were certainly one of few, but they had thrown their lot in with technology creation and manufacturing. If you don't have a groundbreaking idea to give yourself a leg up, trying to catch up with technology makers is damn near impossible. So, who else? Who was above even then? And then it hit me. Politicians. If I became mayor, it'd go a long way in putting the Partridge name back in everyone's mouths. Not to mention the wealth it could bring in. And even the police. If I were mayor, I'd have access to all their files. Any piece of evidence as to how they covered up my father's killing would be available to me, and I could use that to get them out of the Knights' pockets and into mine. So, early next year, launched a campaign to become the next mayor of Tahl-thehn, running against the long-standing mayor, Jacob Hirsch, a family man, straight-laced, still married to his first and only wife. He was well liked on the surface, a natural politician, shaking hands, kissing babies, the usual shit. I couldn't beat him on that front. But he'd been running the show a long time. The people wanted new blood, someone fresh. So, all I needed was dirt. Any scrap of information that would put him in a bad light. It took some money, a lot of digging, and keeping my ear to the ground to find anything I could on Hirsch. And then I found what I needed. An affair with a former colleague, a child born and subsequently thrown into the sewers to die. Monstrous. And even a name to go with it, Jacob Darcy Jr. The problem was, there was no Jacob Darcy the mother knew. It was just a thinly veiled attempt to get away from Jacob Hirsch Jr. How much of that story is true, I can't really say. But the documents on the child, the mother being a former colleague, leaving his organisation not long after she became pregnant, it all wrapped itself up with a nice bow. I ran my campaign as a typical one, knowing full well that this would go. A new contender against an old line. Some liked the idea, but most people wouldn't give me a second glance. Then, when my polling numbers were at the lowest point, we released the information on Jacob's illegitimate son, anonymously. And suddenly, I was looking like a great alternative to the people of this city. It was too late for another contender to come into the fold, and I was looking good. Then the Knights had to go and open their ruddy mouths. The Knight family and their businesses were seen as shining examples to the people of this city. Folks who had worked their way from the bottom to the top with a dash of smarts to help them along the way. Whenever grand news was to be announced and the public need to be calmed, even if it had nothing to do with the Knights, they would still hold a press conference in front of their tacky-ass building, and the news networks would come running, broadcasting every word those snakes would say, salivating over it. When the mayoral election was tipping well into my favour, they announced a press conference. I already knew how this was going to go. They certainly weren't going to favour me. What I did not expect was just how low they would go. Brandon's father, Trevor Knight, started the press conference neutral. But it didn't take him long to get into it.
We understand you have concerns over the supposed past actions of our current mayor, Jacob Hirsch. Those criticisms would be valid if they had any evidence to back them up, but the fact of the matter is, this was an accusation with no source. Nothing to indicate there's any fact behind it, just a political play by a supporter of Carver Partridge or Mr. Partridge himself.
Mister? Yeah, at least there was some level of begrudging respect there.
Let us be clear. We do not believe these wild accusations, and we stand by our current mayor, Jacob Hirsch, and have faith that he is the best candidate in the race by a wide margin. He will have our vote in good conscience, and we hope that the people of Tahl-thehn will follow our lead and see reason in voting for Jacob Hirsch once more.
That seemed like the perfect winding down place, but something crossed my mind. Calling me out by name, clearly the Knight family knew I had returned and was active in the city and businesses again. But during all that time, Brandon had never made an attempt to contact me. Why? I figured the press statement was over. Not too bad, all things considered. Then he continued.
We all know the Partridge family has been a blight on this city for several generations. These people operate at best shady businesses that often trick people out of their hard-earned money. And with Carver Partridge taking over the family business in recent years, we have seen the uptick in crime on our streets. Carver has drawn these people in and made our city worse for wear. We see no viable reason anyone should be voting for this clearly unethical man in a mayoral election.
Thank you, and have a good day. My mother was not insane, but the night said she was. My father was not suicidal, but the night said he was. But I was pissed. In that moment, I wondered why I had been so cordial to them. I hadn't spoken to them, but I'd given them a wide berth. I didn't say a word about them or gone after any of their businesses or customers, but now they were asking, begging for an attack, and now I had the resources and was prepared to oblige them. You know, it was probably the easiest thing I had to do since I had gotten back to the States, to home. The mother and father and I were getting older, becoming creatures of habit. Every Thursday night they go to the movies, early, getting out between 7 and 8, and then walking the streets of Tahl-thehn back to their penthouse apartment. A little simulated sidewalk construction and my boys were able to shepherd them down an alley to get around it. There, all that was needed was one man with a revolver. Looking back, this plan seems so simple, uncomplicated, with no backups in the event it failed. If I were to do it all again, I would certainly be doing it better. But nonetheless, all it took was 2 shots each, and they were dead and gone. They wouldn't be saying anything bad about my family again. After the parents' death, word spread round that it was a political assassination, that they had been killed on account of their support of Mayor Hirsch and their condemning of me. A lot of interesting stories came out about all that. How I had done the deed myself, that I had enlisted the help of zoo animals to finish the job. Funny stuff. But either way, he riled the public up. And on election day, they voted Hirsch back in. My election team pushed me to start immediately preparing for running again at the next term, but my interest in that path fizzled out. Who needs the politics anyway? I have my own businesses to tend to and grow now, and trying to go for the mayor seat would require me to either abandon them or start half-assing it. I wasn't really interested in either. For the next few years, things went smoothly. My little empire chugged along, growing at a steady pace. New opportunities arose, new job markets were created by me, and the Partridge name became one of the most well-known and talked about in the city again. The Knight Corporation had interim leaders who allowed it to continue functioning, but bit by bit, it lost power to my organisation. Then, about 5 years down from the Knight family deaths, my operations began to be interrupted. Mid-level jobs are being torn apart by some nutso in a ninja outfit, wielding no guns, nothing but his fists and smoke bombs, all very theatrical. When the jobs fell apart, my boys were left alive, but a lot of them fled the city, my employ. A few remaining believed it was because they feared that my punishment for their failing at their jobs would be quite harsh, painful, and possibly deadly. And to be fair, they weren't wrong. The remaining were punished. A small militia of men losing to one lunatic. I was quite disappointed. Initially, I waved him off, believing he was just some loony who'd get himself off by one of my operations or someone else somewhere. But he didn't. He kept coming back, and I started to lose money. And just when I thought that things couldn't get worse, but 6 months after the attack started, he showed up again. Brandon Knight had decided to pop his head back up out of the hole he had dug for himself after his parents' death. Information I had was that he had left the country not long after his folks died. I was not aware he had come back. In fact, with him not taking over his family's company straight after his parents' death, I figured he wanted nothing more to do with it and would not be returning. Colour me surprised, not only did he return, he immediately started up his parents' own press conferences again to announce that he'd be taking over the company. He cited his time out of the country as a way to heal and to learn the necessary lessons of running a world-spanning company like his. I felt like that last part was a dig at me. For as big as my empire had become in the city, it had not stretched beyond the city. To be honest, I hadn't really considered it. But now, I was thinking about it. But those thoughts wouldn't matter. With the masked man continuing his assault on my jobs, the Knight Corporation quickly regained a lot of ground it had lost to my organisation. It seemed the people at Tahl-thehn really wanted their golden boy back and switched to his business dealings the moment he was available. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My money was disappearing again. I had to seriously start considering selling off valuable collections I'd gathered in the family manor. Things that would empty it again. That's when I knew I'd have put a stop to this myself. But I couldn't go after Knight directly. He clearly had the upper hand on the business side of things, but the one thing I would be able to affect was this masked man attacking my jobs. If I could off that bastard, it would free up one side of this war. My boys had clearly failed me for months on that front. Now, I had to get involved myself. You know the whole thing. You want something done right, you gotta do it yourself. I started handling jobs personally again. It made me long for my teenage years back in London, when I was getting into the thick of it with my mates. Being exhilarated by what might happen, dodging cops when something went south, and if this masked man wanted to be all theatrical. And so would I. I left a dead partridge at the sight of every one of my jobs. It earned the perpetrator of those jobs the nickname of the Partridge. I liked it, though it may have been a bit too on the nose. It got the police sniffing round. It was the first time they were my family's manor since my father's death. They were not welcome. Bad. With no actual evidence left behind, all the police could do was theorise, not arrest. Weird how they acted on that theory, but did nothing when it came to this vigilante. Unfortunately, the masked man didn't attack my jobs for a bit. I checked with other organisations and they were all hit on nights that I was left alone, so I guess he was just busy. I need to keep this up a while longer before I finally got a chance to see him myself. 2 months in, no major obstacles and definitely no masked man. He finally showed up. Killed the lights of the warehouse we were in. Pitch black. The sounds of something rustling on one side, then the other. A whooshing sound overhead. I could certainly see why many of my men were scared off. It wasn't easy to keep my head straight. We turned on flashlights, but that didn't give us much in the way of visibility and only gave him a shining beacon as to where each of us were. A shout of one man that was silenced quickly. Muffled scream of another. Then a metal crash skid into my feet. One of the cameras I'd set up was destroyed and thrown in front of me. I knew it was a scare tactic. If he had wanted, he could have thrown it at me, not my feet. He wanted me to see it, to see how little control I had over the situation. I raised my gun and flashlight to where the camera had been thrown from. And then my instincts kicked in. I spun round, fired. I hit him. I was so surprised it worked, I didn't fire again. I should have emptied my clip into him. In the light, I saw him stumble, heard him grunt. And then he pulled out a gun of his own. I thought he didn't use them. He pointed up, shot a grapple shell, zipped away, out of sight from my flashlight. One of the other boys was able to get the lights back on. We got ours back up and we searched the whole warehouse. No sign of him. He fled. Coward. I returned to the spot where I shot him. There was no blood, but I must have hit him. The shot didn't make the pinging sound it would have made if it had been deflected by the metal surroundings. There was a chip or something with a piece of a round hole in it. Armour. Bulletproof. No wonder we had not been able to take him down. Even if my boys did a spray and pray, they just would have hit the armour and he would have walked off without taking any real damage. But this stuff ain't cheap. And if he had to keep replacing it, this guy likely wasn't just some random loony running on the street. I highly doubt the money coming from our broken jobs would be enough to keep his charade going. A bit away from the armour, I saw an electronic. Another piece of something likely broken off by my bullet. It was a digital screen of some form. Couldn't tell what it was used for, but on the back was some of the manufacturing print. Manufact 9. Manufactured by the Knight Corporation. That was why this had all been so difficult. This masked man was being funded by Brandon Knight. Now, I knew what I needed to do. I needed to get my hands on Brandon Knight. Which may have actually been more difficult. I had a number of operations run by the boys discreetly that always fell apart in one way or another. I told them that if they were not 100% certain they were going to get him, that they should abandon the mission. We'd only get one shot at this. If it failed and they became aware, he'd get more bodyguards, lock himself down a whole lot more, and getting him then would be borderline impossible. His pattern was to work all day at his corporation's headquarters, then head home in his car kept in the corporation's private storage. He never seemed to go out to just party or have a night out on the town. I suppose I may be to blame for that when we killed his parents like I did. This kept going for months. The masked man kept hitting our jobs, but I wasn't as interested in stopping him anymore. I had my target. This punk was just some pawn I wanted to take down the king. Situation wasn't changing. Doing the same thing over and over and over wasn't giving us any better opportunities. And then it hit me. I needed to draw him out. Do something a little daring to get his attention. Get him out of that ivory tower of his. I'd asked him to run for the mayor's office. We weren't anywhere near election 2 years out, in fact. But I'd bet that his family's hatred of mine would be enough to get him out of the foxhole. And sure enough, he announced a press conference, just like his parents. I had the boys kitted up, masked up, and right in the middle of his press conference, they converged. What was great was that the conference was being shown live, so I got to see in real time the boys do a spectacular job. He tried to fight back. Seemed to be doing a pretty good job of it too. But none of that mattered once one of the boys was able to pop him in the leg. He still tried to fight, but the butt of a shotgun to the back of his head put him out. They grabbed him and hauled him off. What helped was the cameraman ran at the first sign of trouble, so no one was able to turn the camera to see the license plate of the van they were using. But just to be sure, I had that van sent directly to the chop shop once they dropped the unconscious Knight off at the closest warehouse. I didn't get this far by being sloppy. That evening, I finally got a chance to see him myself. Two princes. Still in his business suit, chained to a chair, a black bag over his head. I took it off, expecting to see his raging face underneath. But he was still there. He looked comfortable, peaceful. There was a streak of blood running down his neck from the knock to the back of the head. I felt sorry for him. I could hardly believe this was my old friend. My chum, my mate. But he wasn't. The child I knew died while I was in London. The thing that was sitting in front of me was a husk. Some piece of scum that had taken over his body. Brainwashed to follow in his parents' footsteps. The squeaky clean Brandon I knew would never have done that. Then he started coming round. He looked around the room, tired eyes, groggy. Then he settled on me. He spat out my name, Carver Partridge. And something took over me. Logically, I knew the child I was friends with died while I was in London. But emotionally, it didn't truly hit until he started talking to me in that tone. Such malice, hatred. And for what? I spared him when I had his parents killed. I didn't go after him when he fled the country. He should have been grateful. But after saying my name, he clapped up. Not another word. He wrestled with his bindings, and I watched for a few moments, pleased to see this enemy of mine in a position of weakness. His family had trod all over mine. Now I'd done the same to them. After a few moments, watching him struggle got boring. He wasn't getting out of the chains. After his little show at the press conference, I made damn sure there'd be no way out for him. And he seemed to realise. He slowed down with his tips, turned back to me, started banging on about how we'd known each other since we were kids, that I'd never consider killing such an old friend. I looked down at the gun in my hand. There was some level of uncertainty there. I nodded my head to try to beat in I was going to do this. But I didn't move beyond that. He said, "See, Carver, you're better than this." I looked into his eyes. There was no fear. This man was begging for his life with his voice, but his facial expression was absent of anything. A terrible actor. I knelt down to be on his level, and I told him the friend I knew was certainly dead when he hired a vigilante to go after my jobs. Then I stood back up and raised the gun. Then the fear came over his face. He tried to hide it, tried to keep a straight face, but the mask was cracking. I stood there for a few moments, and then I dropped the gun. He let out a gigantic sigh of relief. He let his head drop. He did not look at me again. I wasn't ready. Not in that moment. I walked round to the back of his chair. Started fiddling with the chains. I could feel him tense against them. He was waiting for me to release him. Then I shot him in the back of the head. He was probably dead after the first shot. All the tension of his muscles was gone. But after a moment or two, I started firing, over and over and over. When his body wrenched forward from the shots, I continued firing, unloading my entire clip into his skull. I ran out of bullets. I heard the click twice, then stopped. I let my arm drop, raising my head to the sky, closing my eyes, taking a deep breath. That was satisfying. But the feeling didn't last long. My family had been torn down by it. In return, I'd taken away all of the members of the Knight family, and yet I didn't feel whole like I expected. It took a moment, but I realised my work wasn't complete. This was just a step on the path, but killing the Knights was never the goal. I went back to work, closed up that warehouse for good, letting his body rot and the rats have it. After a few months of nobody finding him or his body, everyone expected the worst fate for Brandon Knight. Some tried to fool themselves into thinking he'd escaped, fled the country and was still out there somewhere. Whatever helps him sleep at night, I guess. The masked man stopped hitting our jobs. After he found out his meal ticket was gone, I figured he'd fled, or just went back to being some weirdo civilian. For the next 8 years, the Knight Corporation floundered, switching from one head of the company to the next, losing business every time, and I was always ready to swoop in to pick up the lost market. Then, they had lost so much business, so much money, they were looking to sell. And I bought them in a moment. Their worldwide logistics could certainly be useful. I took their plans, made copies under the Partridge Company name, then scrapped everything. Maybe they could have been useful, but it wasn't about the money anymore. I had plenty of that. This is about crushing the last vestige of the Knight name in this city. They would not be returning. And that happened almost 2 decades ago. There has not been a serious challenge to my position ever since. And that is why you've never heard of the Knight family. That is why I'm the king of this city, why I must be seen. speaking of which, where you at on that?
I'm done with it, sir. Have been for a little while now.
Ah, alright, well, let me see it. That is beautiful. That is exactly what I wanted. Well done, boy. While this little therapy session has been great, I may have revealed a bit too much in it. My boys are going to have to make you disappear.
Wait, what? No. 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 No.
That is beautiful. I'm going to hang up my mum and dad right now.